I would now like to leave the floor to Nadia Scialabba. We have the privilege of having her here. There are a lot of studies that she worked on in the framework of F.A.O. I've got a study from 2002 in my mind that opened up my eyes and that Nadia has carried out. We cooperated with her during the expo, and she contributed to drafting some guidelines for biodynamic and organic agriculture. So thanks for being here. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you for everyone who's still here after a very long day. Maybe you would like to talk to, I don't know whether I'm allowed to be a bit more interactive. I'm going to talk in Italian. My Italian is not perfect. I'm from Lebanon, but the slides are in English. So, first of all, an overview of our food system and agricultural system today. So I'd like to give you some hints as to what we did in the framework of F.A.O. for future agriculture. 1 out of 9 people in the world is hungry. And they are hungry in a world that has a lot of food. We have enough food for everybody. Still, hunger does exist. We have so many production systems that we've dwelled on, but still the same problem remains. Today, we have 25% more nourishing matter, more nourishing elements per capita compared to the 60s, but still inequity and inequality is growing. Children are particularly affected by the issue. 16.6% of children suffer from malnutrition below 5 years, under 5 years. They eat a lot of carbohydrates, but their diet is not diversified and rich enough to be in a good state of health. When we launched our report on food insecurity last year, based on regional and country figures, we realized that the reasons for hunger are due to distribution of resources. India is a country that has enough calories for all the population. Still, it has the highest number of starving people because their access to food and to clean water is really limited. The same applies to sanitary installations. 2 billion people can't access sanitary plants and structures, and this is a problem that causes hunger because food is affected by diseases too. And in Africa, hunger is due to political instability. Moreover, 1 out of 7 people in the world is malnourished. Actually, statistics say that undernourishment hits 2 billion people. Now here I wrote just 1 billion, which is a more cautious estimation. But there are 1 billion people in the world who do not have enough sufficient good quality food. And one of the main reasons for that is that the relationship between land, plants and animals and mankind is not deep enough. And this is due to the use of mineral fertilizers that cause plant roots to be weakened by chemical fertilizers, so that plants are not as nutritious as they used to be. For example, the British Health Department published a report that says that the nutritious content of fruits and vegetables has gone down over the last 5 years by more than 76%. This is a huge amount. Minus 46% for calcium minus 16% for potassium. If you go and look at the website of the USA Department for Agriculture, they say that on average our food now is 30% less nutritious than in 1945. So what we eat is food that is empty. 1 out of 7 people eats too much, and they eat industrial food products that's full of sugar and fat. So these people are overnourished, and some 500 to 700 million people are obese. And as you know, obesity has a huge cost for the health systems. Obesity is often also linked to type 2 diabetes among adolescents as well now, which did not used to be the case in the past. Strokes, heart diseases, high blood pressure, and other consequences related to obesity. The United States have the highest rate of obesity. 30% of their citizens are obese or affected by heart diseases that kill 40% of the American population nowadays. And that's due to industrial food, which is enriched by chemical agents that damage health. 1 out of 7 human beings suffers from diseases due to their health, to their food, sorry. And these diseases have different causes. First of all, fertilizers make our food less nutritious. First of all, then second of all, we use more and more pesticides, we use more and more antibiotics in breeding, we use hormones in breeding. Grain is subject to radiation that leads to GMOs that have been modified for years, even without our intervention, our contribution. And that is one of the reasons why so many people are allergic to gluten now, more than in the past. And then additives that are added to processed food are damaging our health. We also have foods that are too refined. When it comes to grain and sugar, all the fiber that normally would clean our body is deleted, is taken out of the food we eat while processing. We eat too much animal protein, and we are realizing that this animal protein is not good for our body. One of the main diseases that are increasing in incidence today is cancer. The WHO estimates that every year 8 million people or 800 million people are affected by cancer, and the USA is the country with the highest rates among men and women in this respect. Another disease that we know more and more that we are surprised by is Alzheimer, which every year has an incidence which is twice as high as it used to be in the year before. Or in the past, old people used to be wise people, but now they no longer are, because they get Alzheimer, because they lack vitamin E and vitamin C in their food. Hippocrates, who's the father of modern medicine, said that those who do not understand food cannot understand human diseases. Agriculture also causes lots of problems. We know that agriculture and deforestation is responsible for 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, of all damage that the world suffers from due to climate change and due to environmental disasters that doubled compared to the 80s, well, 30% of costs for these events are paid by agriculture in terms of destroyed crops and in terms of physical infrastructure that's destroyed as well. We produce a lot, but we waste 30% of our produce. This is a study that was carried out some years ago by F.A.O. that tells us that the amount of food we waste includes resources that we didn't use. For example, if food waste was a country, it would be the third country that emits the most greenhouse gases after the US and Russia. 4.4 gigatons of carbon is emitted every year because of food waste and because of resources that we use without really needing them. The same applies to water. The water that we use for food waste would be 3 times as big as the Geneva Lake. Most of our food is wasted. So instead of increasing yields, it would make much more sense to reduce waste that we are responsible for day by day. And these are some of the elements of damage that mankind causes for the environment. We realized, moreover, that if the food we waste costs us $936 billion a year, then the environmental and social costs is $1.5 trillion a year that we waste. And this is quite a low estimate because the real prices are much higher. What we took into consideration here is the amount of damage, the amount of the cost for damage that we need to pay for, and other elements such as the impacts of erosion and of falling yields. You might have seen this graph already. It was published in 2009. And it shows that our resources are not endless. We are already squeezing the earth in terms of biodiversity and in terms of nitrogen cycle. So I told you a lot of bad news, but there is some hope. In his encyclical, Pope Francis launches an appeal which is really good. He says the urgent challenge of protecting a common home encompasses the preoccupation of uniting the whole human family in the pursuit of a sustainable integral development, because we do know that things can change. We know that we can change things so the situation is reversible. What we did with our climate is reversible, with our health is reversible, and so we can still act. The next generation maybe it won't have time enough to do so. I will not be dwelling on the concept of organism in agriculture because we've talked about that today already, but I'll be talking about agricultural communities that use local resources to try and maximize their yield. So the amount of work in an organic farm has a much higher yield than in a farm which is not organic. Something is taken for granted, which is to say that we have a system that avoids people to accumulate debt if we work with biodynamic farming. In India and other countries, 30,000 people kill themselves every year because of debts they have from farming and growing GMO cotton. But some months ago I was in New Zealand, where milk producers and other producers killed themselves in the month of August. 9 of them did so, and this happens both in developing and in developed countries. where farmers are desperate because of the debts they need to make to get their companies up and running. Pesticides still are the biggest problem for our farmers. Every year, 2.5 million people are affected by diseases connected with pesticides. This is still a major issue, even though it's no longer under the spotlight. Very often, diseases emerge out of intensive agriculture, such as the bird flu and BSH. We also have problems with antibiotic resistance. Since the beginning of the 1900s, we haven't produced any new antibiotics. So if we are immune to the antibiotics we have now, in the future we will have a big problem. But this has already happened, because in animal breeding, too many antibiotics are used. And food is richer in minerals and vitamins when we don't use pesticides. Feed the children before the chicken. This is a provocation. It's not one of my quotations. It's a quotation by a friend who works in the organic movement and who said that this system is feeding animals more than people. If we have a look at protein conversion that's eaten by animals and then by mankind, then the conversion rate is really low. It would make much more sense to feed people directly instead of feeding animals and then feeding people using these animals. Today, we use 36% of grains produced worldwide to feed animals. In developing countries, this rate is at 42%, and we estimate that in the future it might be 56%. This is a lot. More than half of the produced grains are used to feed animals.
Abbiamo fatto uno studio negli anni scorsi.
We carried out a study some years ago that hasn't been published yet. Just part of it was published. The question was, what would happen if the whole world converted to organic production? And we realized that in that case we would be able to produce calories enough for the whole world. According to the F.A.O, if we go on with the current demand for more protein by developing countries, with increasing economic power, well, if we go on with business as usual, then we will end up needing more than 3,000 calories per capita in 2050 for 9.2 billion people. So we analyzed the performance of the organic system for sustainability and realized that in terms of water use, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions and other KPIs, it would be a positive performance except for one factor, that would be land use. If all agriculture was to be organic, we would need 14 to 16% more land we don't have. And we realized that if there is one KPI that could make things much better, that's animal feed based on concentrates. If we eliminate concentrates from animal feeds, then the performance would be much more positive. I could spend a whole morning talking about this, because this is a research that was published in December by the Royal Society after being rejected 4 times by Nature and Science. But anyway, we managed to have it published, and now we have recognition from the scientific community worldwide for this research. The blue line is what we have today. The red line are estimates by 2015, dating back to 2012, if we went on with business as usual. This is what F.A.O says. And the green line represents a system when we do not feed animals with concentrate. Therefore, a more sustainable system. we realize land use would be not as big. This is the green line. As to animals, for cows, we would have estimates from 2015 on that would allow us to feed the population, whereas for other animals we should reduce the number of units if we want biomass, recycled biomass, to be used as feed. That would mean that our animal protein consumption would be 3 or 4 times less big than today. This is the use of the land, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphor cycle. These are some other data about greenhouse gases, water, deforestation, soil erosion, and we realize that all factors would improve. In terms of the amount of calories we could produce, today we have 2,873 calories produced per capita, and the estimate for business as usual will be 3,028. If we didn't do that, we could produce exactly the same number of calories. So we could feed the world with this system. If we look at the percentage of protein, we realize that we consume a lot of protein from animal origins. If the system was sustainable, we would have to consume 11% of proteins from animals, whereas now we consume 38%. There are no statistics about the amount of current consumption of protein. The recommended portion is 50 to 60 grams a day, and if we exceed this amount by more than 12%, then the risk of cancer will be reduced. Somebody asked a question from the audience, but without microphone, so I don't know what I said. I would have to dwell on these days figures for more time, but I refer you to the documents that we published. There are articles that are a summary, but we also have online materials on methods, on what you calculate, what were calculated, so that you realize what the calculations were. This is another way to present the same results. Then again, climate change, the business as usual scenario, and the incidence of climate change on crops all flow into these data, which are the same as before, just presented in another way. And if we went on with business as usual, then we would have big problems. The red line here is the best scenario, whereas the dotted line is the scenario that takes into account climate change as well. One of the aspects we see here is climate. This is another study we carried out in 2009. By analyzing the potential of organic farming to produce neutral agriculture when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, we realized that at least 10% of emissions could be avoided if we didn't use chemical fertilizers. Half of it if we didn't produce the fertilizers, the other half of it if we reduced N2O emissions in farms. There is a lot of discussion about carbon management in the soil. We carried out a lot of estimates about the ability of soil to store carbon, and our figures tell us that a conventional agriculture produces too many greenhouse gases. When looking at biology and organic fields, and by comparing it to the amount of energy, for every food calorie we used 2 kilos of fossil fuels, whereas in organic farming we could avoid an energy crisis. And these are some figures for Europe and the United States. I haven't been talking too much about the use of humus in agriculture, in organic agriculture, which is the basis for organic approach. You all know it, but we also realize that in many projects the irrigation needs are reduced by 40 to 60% if you use humus, because the earth is better at keeping humidity inside. And even when we have too much water, the structure of the soil allows for drainage to work better. When we talk about organic farming, we must be self-critical. What can we do better? We realized that at the first level of sustainability, the efficiency in the use of resources was demonstrated. We know that. The other level of sustainability refers to the fact that with organic farming you can replace external inputs successfully. One more level we need to work on is the ecosystem level, and I'm thinking about the rational use of concentrate feed for animals and the lack of an approach which is holistic, even though today we heard about some interesting approaches. Even though in biodynamics there's an improvement compared to organic agriculture when it comes to rational use of feed. This is my point of view, not really what the F.A.O. says. About the superiority of organic products compared to conventional products. We had a lot of debates about it. So endocrine disruptors were pesticides that damaged the endocrine system. We wouldn't recognize this truth, now we do. This is a topic that is still really hot, and accepting what is going on hasn't yet happened in the F.A.O. because the F.A.O. represents 193 agricultural ministries. So at the ministerial level, we still have a lot to do. We already talk about proteins and calories, but not really about other health concerns.
Quello che si vede sempre di più.
We realized that in agriculture we didn't exit of the industrial era as well. I mean, we didn't have a big revolution. The industry moved to the internet and other smaller scale things, whereas in agriculture we still are lagging behind in evolution. Because we believe that big quantities can make crops better, but anyway. A homeopathic approach would make a difference, so that nature can be healthier and prevent diseases. This is what we realized in organic and biodynamic agriculture. Because when we eat more vegetables, we have a higher amount of fibers and antioxidants that make us more immune towards diseases. And I'd like to say that I would like to make reference to the China study by Campbell. If you didn't read the China study by Campbell, I would recommend you to read it. It's a study that was carried out for 27 years. It's a study financed by all associations in the field of cancer research. It was carried out on a very large scale, and it has more than 8,000 associations that are scientifically relevant from the scientific point of view to demonstrate the link between what we eat and our health. In this research, for example, we realized that animal proteins would not damage health when they were just 5% of a diet, but when they were more than 20% of a diet, then cancer processes would start beginning, especially for liver cancer. But one's diet was the trigger for cancer processes. So the study of food in cancer research is emerging, is still growing, but there are good hints that indicate that in the future we will be able to cure diseases such as cancer, obesity, and heart diseases, as well as autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis, diabetes, osteoporosis as well. This is another problem with so many proteins that create acids. So our body looks for calcium in our bones, and this is why osteoporosis emerges. This is just a way our body uses to defend itself against diseases. From the point of view of the economy, we carried out a study. It's an analysis of a lot of other studies that were carried out in other parts of the world, in developing countries. We realized that the reduced costs and a higher price allow organic agriculture to be much more profitable than conventional agriculture, because the yields are 19% higher. There are gains for big distributors, but the gain for small farmers is going down. And in this sense, in this direction, there's an ongoing work to understand what the right price is, and to understand how we can establish negotiations with producers to establish the right price. And emerging science is full cost accounting as well. This is what I showed you with food waste before. There's a protocol which is called the Natural Character Protocol that we're working on together with 200 companies, businesses, from the food sector and other sectors as well. We've been working on it for a year now. This protocol will be published in July this year. Because companies and their shareholders are more and more asking the management for triple bottom line reporting. I'll be really fast on it because time is money, but big industries are realizing that they need to mainstream environmental costs in their operations. They don't do it just for ethical reasons, they also do it because these companies depend on natural resources, and this dependence is fundamental. If a company, for example, needs water to produce food, and if a company knows that in 5 years' time there will be a water crisis, then they will try to cut down on their water consumption. It becomes more and more important to evaluate the dependence from natural resources and to mainstream environment into accounting. This is an organic company that was among the pioneers that showed the cost of organic and non-organic food. They launched an awareness campaign that shows you that if you buy organic products, you can save a lot of money, and you can save a lot in terms of water, earth, land, and environmental damage. This is another study that evaluated the cost of industrial agriculture for society, which is $2.35 trillion dollars a year in terms of environmental costs. And this is a cost that we are all paying because we do pay tax. Therefore, if we recognized these costs more, if we were more aware of them, we could also be an engine of change in the market. Just some words about oligarchy in the food sector. Only 6 companies are dominating the market worldwide. They decide what we need to produce, what we need to eat. And you see the names here. 75% of the market for agrochemical products is in the hands of these companies, and the same applies for 75% of research in pesticides and seeds that is in the hands of these companies. And now they are trying to converge more. Monsanto is trying to buy Syngenta. Syngenta hasn't accepted yet, but there is a greater convergence. That means that the same companies sell both products and seeds, so there's an interest conflict which is clear out there and taking place. I believe that the biodynamic and organic world can be a promise, because it promises more democracy in the food sector and more participation of farmers based on precise agreed standards by the society, in a system in which small farmers could defend their interests in the face of big companies in places such as in Ethiopia or Uganda. An Indian chief that died some years ago, his name was Seneca, said that when we talk about indigenous people, means that we all need to be indigenous inhabitants of the earth. We all need to go back to our indigenous status. And if you think about it, when you work with the land, you have a more direct communication with the weather, with the land itself. Working the land makes us much more aware of what the land is producing in terms of human relationships. It makes us more aware in terms of the limits of ecosystems, so the need to become indigenous inhabitants of the earth is what we all need to do in our daily lives. To value what the earth gives us. There are some rural and urban networks that are very dynamic and are working on this field. When they do so, they manage to reduce food waste and they value the sacred aspect of food. This is the website of the F.A.O, where you can find all the research I've talked about, except for the last one that hasn't been published yet. You'll find all the details and you can write to me as well. Thanks.
Grazie a Nadia Scialabba.
Thank you, Nadia Scialabba, for supplying us with these figures that are very precious, because they come from a very important source, from the most important source in the sector, which is the body that regulates food issues in the field of the United Nations.